Yes, folks, it's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. So let's play Faith and Knowledge. Take your pick.
In one of my public discourses recently, it was discoursed back to me that it's too bad that I don't respect people of faith. Well, if you want to have faith, that's fine. I don't disrespect that. But certainly when you use your faith to belittle or to say that my faith is worth listening to and God loves me, but your faith isn't worth listening to and God hates you. Oh, he doesn't hate you. He's just going to make you burn in hell forever. Somehow I part ways with people of faith at that point. Certainly I don't think most Christians or most Jews or most Mohammeds or most people of any of the monotheistic religions, those being the three of them, or most people of the polytheistic and non-theistic at all religions are that critical in their hearts of other people. They might take it that the tenets of their religion say that, but I doubt in their hearts that they're really committed to everybody else living in hell forever just so that Jesus can love them special. So it was under the criticism from people that do think like that that I got to thinking in terms of faith and what people mean by faith. And I've come up with a definition for faith. We'll see what you think about it. I think a definition for faith is trying to believe in things that you know are not true. The fact is, why do you need faith? If you know something is true, you don't need faith. You know it's true. I know the sun is going to come up tomorrow. How do I know that? Because I've studied science. I've looked at how the world goes around the sun. I've looked at how the world turns. I also have a long recorded history and personal history of the sun coming up in the morning. When I was hitchhiking around the country, it was spring. It was cold. I was in the mountains. And I would go to bed beside the road or under a bridge, and it would be cold. And my sleeping bag wasn't very good, and I'd wake up pretty well hourly, and I'd see the stars crossing the sky, and the stars that started when I went to bed over on the east side of the sky, when I saw them getting to the west side of the sky, I knew that the sun would be coming up not too far in the future. But it wasn't faith that told me that. It was knowledge that told me that. I didn't need faith for that. Now, yes, you can call that faith. I had faith that there would be a better day, faith that it would get warm, but that really isn't faith. The only time you really need faith is when you really know in your heart that you don't really know if it's true or not. And if you want to believe it, whether it's true or not, and that is what we call faith. Now, you can be a faith-based person. That's fine with me. I don't care. But I don't know why you would be. Why worry about the things you can't know? You can't possibly know. I just looked up the definition of the word faith. One of the definitions was a belief in what other people have told you. Well, why would you believe what somebody else tells you? Believe what you tell you. And if you don't believe it, go educate yourself on it. Why do you need faith? We live in this phenomenal existence, this phenomenal gift, this phenomenal thing called life, or the great wahoo. It includes everything that you have ever thought of and ever will think of. It includes all of your history. It includes every sunrise and sunset. It includes color, sound, smell. why on earth would you spend your time being faithful when you could spend your time celebrating and educating yourself and learning and finding more and more ways to say, wow, I just am so overwhelmed by this amazing, amazing gift I've been given. I was driving through Stanley once, and I stopped at a restaurant in Lower Stanley. And I got to talking with the owner of the restaurant. And he said, we started, I don't know how, we started talking about stuff like that. And he said, you know, if you think about winning the lottery, people say, oh, wow, I'd like to win the lottery, have lots of money. And your chances are 1 in a trillion of winning the Idaho lottery. But you've already won the lottery. You've already won the biggest lottery of all. It's not for a few $1 billion. It's not for a few $1 million. It's not for a few trinkets. It's for the whole ball of wax. It's for emotion. It's for celebration. It's for tears. It's for color. It's for everything. You've already won it. And when you figure out how many sperm come out with each ejaculation, and you figure out how many eggs there are in every woman, and you figure out how long that trail goes back to when the first amoeba came out of the sea, you've already won the big wahoo. You've already won a lottery that is so far beyond winning a few $1 million. All you have to do is quit having faith. Breathe deep and open your eyes.
Well, folks, let's go for a train ride in Alaska. I drove up the Alaskan Highway in March of 2002. We'll probably be taking several trips from that journey. And in the meantime, I took the railroad in Alaska. Out of the entire state of Alaska, we will be looking particularly at the railroad from Anchorage to Fairbanks. You'll notice that it does go on down to Seward, or Seward, I guess it's Seward. But I didn't take that route, and this is about the only railroad in Alaska other than that little tiny road over by Haines, over by Juneau, that goes up in close to Whitehorse. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at this railroad right here from Anchorage to Fairbanks. You'll notice that the railroad and the highway look like they're pretty close together. And in a lot of ways they are. This route is 356 miles long, but there are many, many places where the railroad is the only form of transportation. People who live out there will do what they call a flag stop on the railroad. The railroad will stop anywhere that a person is standing beside the railroad waving their arms. They might stop for bears too, I'm not sure about that. But if there is a person of any sort waving their arms beside the railroad track, the conductor will stop the train. That is how people get their fuel. It's how they get their snowmobiles, which is the main means of transportation in Alaska. It is how they get their flour. It's how they get their beer. It's how they get everything they get. And of course, it's how they get to and from where they live. In the winter, the train only runs once a week. Once a week up to Fairbanks, and the next day once a week from Fairbanks down to Anchorage. So if you're there and you're having a little tiff with whoever it is you're living with, you just have to tough it out because there's no running away to anywhere. I don't know if I'd like that lifestyle, but there seem to be quite a few people that do it. We did stop a lot of times on this train, and it was kind of a nice little addition to the journey. So here we are in Anchorage Station. This is where we begin our trip, and and this is the beautiful train that we're going to be taking. This is called the Aurora Winter Train. In the summer they run quite a few more trains, and particularly they run a Denali Star train up to Denali, the highest mountain in the world, I guess. It's a very big wilderness area that a lot of people go to. But as you can see, the winter train is an engine or two passenger cars, and the baggage car. The baggage car is where all of those people's supplies are kept, and I suppose if you get too rowdy on the train, well, they'll just throw you in the baggage car and let you ride back there. So, from Anchorage Station, let's take our journey. Boy, are they serious about those rules of kicking you into the baggage car if you don't behave yourself. Here all I did was incorrectly identify Denali as the highest mountain in the world, which anybody knows that that's just foolish babble, and that's what I was doing, of course, was just trying to find words while I kept the program going on here. Denali, also known as Mount McKinley, of course, is the highest mountain in North America, not in the world. And we will be talking more about Denali as we get closer to it on the train here. In the meantime, here we are in the baggage compartment. You'll notice the bags that are laying around, the backpacks and such that are waiting for those people that are going to their little mountains, their little cabins out in the middle of nowhere. These bags will be taken off with the passengers. Not a whole lot of supplies going to the people today, but I'm sure that there are many times that this baggage car is full of supplies going to people. They did let me back into the regular passenger car before we pulled out of Anchorage, and we will be going on down the road. So here we are, trudging our way up the Sustina River from Anchorage to Fairbanks in a distance of 233 miles. We will gain about 2,000 feet in altitude. So we're really quite low. 2,000 feet is about a third of the way from the floor in Boise up to Bogus Basin. So we're not gaining a lot of altitude, but as you can see, because of the weather, it's very rugged terrain. About halfway there, or a little bit more toward the mountain, we pass the deepest ravine we go over, meaning the highest trestle that we go over. And they do a wonderful thing for us. They stop on top of the trestle so you can enjoy the view. Needs to say the train is as wide as the trestle, so for those of us who have a little sense of heights, it's a great joy to be sitting there waiting for the train to start again. And finally, we arrive at Denali. Denali is a national preserve established in 1917, 6 million acres. The feature of the park is Mount McKinley, also known as Denali. In the native language, Denali means the Great One. And it does stick up there. It is a great mountain. We will be considering a little bit more about this amazing Mount McKinley. Mount McKinley was named McKinley after then ex-governor of Ohio and soon to become president, William McKinley. It was named that in 1896. And it has some very interesting features. As I was so properly thrown in the baggage car for having said, Mount McKinley is obviously not taller than Mount Everest. Mount McKinley comes in at 20,320 feet, basically twice as high as the mountains in the Sawtooth Range. And it is 9,000 feet shorter than Everest. In other words, Everest is almost half again taller than McKinley. However, there are some differences between Mount McKinley and Everest. Mount McKinley rises from a plateau that is 2,000 feet. So you have a plateau here that's 2,000 feet, and the mountain rises above it. Well, what does that leave? 18,000 feet. The rise is 18,000 feet. Whereas Everest begins from a valley that is at 17,000 feet and rises 12,000 feet. So instead of 18,000 feet from the valley floor, it only rises 12. So McKinley appears half again as tall as Everest does because of the difference in where you're looking from. You're looking from 2,000 feet instead of 17,000 feet at a mountain that is 20,000 feet high instead of 9,000 feet higher than that. So it's a spectacular mountain. There's one other feature about it that is different than Everest. Everest is part of a chain of mountains. It's like looking at the tallest mountain in the Sawtooths, where you have all the other tall mountains right around it. Whereas McKinley is more like the volcanic mountains of the Cascade chain, where you have these mountains that just come up out of nowhere and they stand there all by themselves. And that makes for a much more bulky, spectacular mountain to look at. So there are reasons that people love Mount McKinley. Mount McKinley, as I said, is not the highest mountain in the world, but it is the highest mountain in North America. And for good reason. It is a very popular mountain amongst climbers and adventurers and people who like to be extremely cold in the middle of the summer. And here we are going to leave our train ride in Alaska, folks. Next week we will be going from Denali on over the pass to the Tanana River, up the Tanana River to Fairbanks. We'll spend the night in Fairbanks. The next morning we will get on the train, have a nice ride back, and innocently not knowing that we are heading not to Anchorage in one nice gentle ride from 8 o'clock in the morning until 7:45 in the evening, but rather we are heading into being stranded in Alaska while they dig out the train. Yes, folks, stranded in Alaska with only a train to keep us warm. Oh no! I ended up with extra cabbage after I ate all the corned beef. Well, went exploring and figured out something different to do with it. And by golly, it was a lot tastier than those ham sandwiches I've been eating. You know, part of being a beer drinker and part of enjoying the Great Wahoo is remembering to feed yourself. And as long as you're feeding yourself, why not celebrate just how great this world is? It is one of the ways we're given the gift. Some ancient religions had gods for it. One of the gods I've been introduced to is Osiris. . According to the Egyptians, Every bit of food you eat, every bit of liquid you drink is the body and the blood of Osiris. Osiris, to them, is the god of winter, the god of the time that life goes underground, the god of what many of us call death. But really, to those who understand life as a cycle instead of a story, is just the time of rest. And from being in the soil comes all of the nourishment. It was my sister's birthday today, so I decided I would walk over to the candy shop and buy some chocolates. Well, hopefully I get a few. In the meantime, what did I find in my neighbor's yard but the very first Forsythia of 2008? Oh, the beautiful Forsythia. I do like it when they start to bloom. We'll get back to the Forsythia here in a minute, but in the meantime, there were a couple other lovely things today on this beautiful, beautiful spring day. One, I noticed the Caltapa tree had its pods blowing in the wind, this bare tree against that beautiful blue sky with those pods just waving in the wind. And my neighbors had a little treat. I just couldn't help but stop and get a picture of this particular celebration of the Great Wahoo. So let's talk Forsythia, shall we? Yes, indeed, Forsythia is the bush that you see as you speed along on the freeway. I remember they used to have huge quantities of them in the middle of the freeway, but we still enjoy them in the springtime. The reason I've always loved it when the Forsythia start to bloom is that the Forsythia is when we first get the wooded plants to blooming. The first time I have noticed, and what I always thought was the very first time that the flowers come into the wooded plants come up off the ground. Once the Forsythia do bloom, it means that the leaves will start coming on the trees will start flowering, and springtime will be moving in. Springtime in the Rockies. Before the Forsythia bloom, we get the small flowers, the small delicate flowers that bloom very early in the spring and later will be blooming very high in the mountains. This is, I believe, called Edelweiss in Switzerland. I've always called them snowbells. They are the first thing that bloom around my house. They, as you can see, are very near to the ground, very delicate, beautiful little spring flowers. They will bloom as early as the first week of January, although usually they bloom, early February. 2 weeks after the snowbells, we get the beautiful little crocuses come up out of the ground. They flower and bloom and start to add a little springtime color. And a couple weeks later, the festive little primroses join us. But, like the other plants, buried near the ground. And that's why I've always loved the Forsythia. It's when the flowers, it's when springtime comes up off of the ground and into the air. And suddenly you really start to see it happening. Now, I know this is going to come as a terrible shock. I had always thought, and I was always pretty darn certain, that the Forsythia is when the plants, when the flowers, when springtime comes up into the air. But you know what? I was wrong. This year I found this flower on one of the walks up in the hills, and it was out, well, it was out about the time the crocuses were. And look at it. It is a big plant. It is a wooded plant. It threw those flowers all over the place. I can't believe I was so wrong. This plant, my friends, is a maple. I had no idea such a huge, huge tree could be flowering when the crocuses are at it. But you know, even though I now know I was completely wrong, the bottom line is I will always be glad when I see the Forsythia blooming. It is a wonderful, festive time in the Great Wahoo when the glorious yellow celebrating Forsythia start to grace our valley. Grasshopper walks in a bar. Bartender says, "That's interesting. We have a drink named after you." Grasshopper says, "Why would you name a drink Bob?" I love that joke. So that's our show for this week, folks. Tune in next week when we will get stranded in a snowstorm on a train in Alaska. I'm sure I'll find some other things to babble about. And in the meantime, enjoy the Great Wahoo.